Hey, what's happening, everybody? Welcome into a brand new episode of Crossed Up. Anthony Sanfilippo is here. I'm Bob Wankel, and Anthony, I think this show could be about 4 minutes today. Just go back and play our commentary really from the past few shows. This Phillies team is really good. They don't lose. They seem to be impervious to the ebbs and flows of a baseball season. They just are ripping teams apart right now. As Jeff Passan said, in a tweet yesterday after they swept the Rangers. They are emasculating teams right now. It's an interesting choice of words, but I don't know that he's wrong. So, look, man, bring you in here. Another sweep. They're 7th of the season. They have not lost in 15 series. Any series. It's been wild. 11-0-4 in their last 15 series. What do you have new for me here?
Their run differential through 51 games is plus 93.
Yeah.
Think about that for a second. Plus 93. I think at this time last year, they were like minus 20 something.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're
100
plus runs better than they were a year ago.
Well, it's not only that. So when you think about it, here's just to really kind of, I mean, first of all, plus 93 is best in baseball right now. But you say, okay, 51, right, into 93, you're pushing being 2 runs per game better than your opposition.
Yes.
That's unfathomable. Like that is the number that I'm having the hardest time, because we've talked about this on the show in the years past. Run differential is kind of a good indicator, right, of where a team's going to be, what teams are going to make the playoffs, which teams are going to miss. And it seems simple. And I said, well, of course, the teams that are winning are going to have better run differential than the teams that are losing. Yes, at the extremes, of course. But the reality of it is that when you see a disparity of that size, it means you're going to win a lot more, and you're really a good team. And that's the number that, Bob, that just sticks out to me more than any other right now. Like that just goes to show they are bludgeoning teams. And yesterday wasn't a bludgeoning; it was 5-2. They won by 3 runs, but it was yet another game where they scored at least 5 runs. And they are just putting teams away unmercilessly. That's the way I look at it. It's really crazy.
Yeah, it's been a complete brand of baseball. Look, I mean, the best way I can say it is they lead Major League Baseball in runs per game. So from an offensive perspective, it's hard to be better than that. And you can look through all the different statistics from the pitching side of things, but at the end of the day, go over to Fangraphs and just look at the pitching from a general perspective. This includes the bullpen, right? We talk so much about how they have the best starting staff ERA in baseball, and that's true. But if you go over and you just look at wins above replacement at Fangraphs, the entire pitching staff sits at 9.6 WAR right now. The next best is Boston at 7.5. I mean, not only are they number 1, but there's such a huge gap between 1 and 2. It kind of just shows you the effectiveness of the overall pitching staff at this point. There is no weakness right now. If I actually pinned you down, Anthony, and said, what is this team's weakness? You'd probably say that Johan Rojas and Christian Pache are somewhat redundant in the outfield, which could be problematic when you get to October. But I think that's something that's going to be addressed one way or the other. And the backup catcher, hitting 113? Are those the things that we're complaining about right now? Because there's really no other true weakness that jumps off the page at you. I know what's going on in right field right now. We're all well aware of it. But, even that, there's been signs of life. It's been a little bit turbulent, a little bit inconsistent, even here in recent weeks, but there are signs of life from that guy. So what is the weakness? Because, here's the thing, right? The conversation is it's all about October. We're waiting for the other shoe to drop. That's the phrase of the week that is coming to focus here these past few days. Well, it's we're all just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Barring injury, what is that shoe? What is it? What are we even talking about right now?
Yeah, there is no shoe, Bob. There is no shoe. And I'm just going to be blunt about it. Okay, do we anticipate that they're going to stay winning at this pace for the whole year? No. And I think that ultimately that's going to be because they're going to get to a point where it's they will take their foot off the gas just a little bit, because they have to. They have to, for keep guys healthy, make sure that they're ready. They'll get to a point in the season where they're like, okay, we got this. We can kind of go on a little bit of cruise control and then ramp it back up towards the end of the season. So I don't anticipate that it goes through this, 73% win percentage, whatever. But at the same time, the ability to do that, the ability to sit there and say we can shape it as we need to as we go later in the season, that goes to show that there isn't a weakness right now. I mean, again, like you pointed out, barring injury, center field is not great. I think that they're going to add to the outfield in some capacity just to have some more versatility. Backup catchers, whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter because in the come playoff time, backup catchers never plays. So it doesn't matter. And beyond that, maybe the back end of the bullpen, because like one of the things that I was wanted to take a look at was just how good the Phillies' top 4 relievers have been versus the rest of the league. Okay, so I had my intern Aiden do a little bit of digging, right, and he ranked all. Yeah, all right,
fancy guy with your intern.
So the Phillies' top 4 relievers: so Matt Strahm, Jeff Hoffman, Jose Alvarado, Ryan Kerkering, compared to the top 4 relievers of every other team. And the criteria that we used there was a minimum of, I think it was 10 appearances minimum. And, then, who those guys are and then rank them by their whip. Okay. So that was a minimum 10 appearances and then rank them by their whip. The Phillies are first in fielding independent pitching, first in fewest home runs allowed, first in earned runs allowed, first in runs allowed, second in hits allowed, third in ERA, fifth in whip. I mean, so you sit there and say, well, the bullpen, maybe they're not as good as maybe everybody thought they would be. Oh, but they are. And it's the big 4 that are. And that's what matters.
Yeah, I think in a perfect world, people keep asking me about this. Like I'll, whether it's my friends at the bar or, I do a hit on the radio. It's like, what does this team need at the trade deadline? And my response is nothing really. Like have to have nothing really. But I do think that it comes down to maybe adding one more arm in the back end of that bullpen mix that you feel really good about taking down big outs. And then certainly I do think that you would like to have another offensive force in your outfield for the reasons that we've previously discussed. You just don't really know what's going to happen with Nick Castellanos. And I am not necessarily a believer in 2024 Johan Rojas offensively. And I've noted that pretty extensively on the show, and I don't really want to belabor the point. But I don't think that the Phillies are in absolute desperation mode, again, barring injury, with how this current roster is constructed. I think that this team, as is, can win the World Series. I'm not saying that they will. I'm just saying I think that as is, this team is good enough to win the World Series. And one of the things that kind of became apparent yesterday, so you just look at the overall depth of what they have. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Christian Pache would be starting on 30 other teams or 29 other teams. I'm not telling you that, Edmundo Sosa would be hitting the middle of an order of most other teams. But if you can find ways to maximize their abilities and get them in the right matchups, they can be very productive, very useful players. And when you're winning at this rate, and you're talking about, 37 and 14 through 51 games, you need contributions from everywhere. It can't just be your stars. It can't just be 2 or 3 starting pitchers. It can't just be 2 relievers. You need your depth pieces to come in and win games for you at some point, because your main guys aren't always going to have it. And what did you see this week against the Rangers, right? Like, I know that the Phillies on Wednesday night already had a 3-2 lead, but it was Edmundo Sosa's 3-run homer that totally changed that game. The game was over at that point. Edmundo Sosa made a contribution that essentially won that game for them on Wednesday night. And then yesterday, Sosa, again, 3 more hits, but it's Christian Pache with a 2-run triple that sort of changed the entire vibe of that game. Because one of the things I did say to you before we started recording was, you love Zach Wheeler on the mound. They had a clear starting pitching advantage against Andrew Heaney, who is not very good. It was just a matter of time. It seemed like once the game started before they were going to break that open. But as we know, we've seen this Phillies team in recent years really struggle in those final games of homestands that are played during the day before they get on a plane and go somewhere. We saw that earlier a couple weeks ago against Toronto, right? In the final game of the 2-game set. It's just like they're always like a little flat. They're kind of always a little bit somewhere else. No big deal. 5-2, 6 in a row, 2 sweeps,
Ho hum.
2 sweeps, 7 sweeps in their last 12 series. No big
Yeah.
deal.
I will say that I think they've found a really nice mix for Sosa. Well, Sosa's obviously got to play a little bit more with Turner being out, but even when Turner was healthy, they found a good, some good spots for Sosa, and I think that they found some good spots for Pache as well. The one thing that I think is kind of underrated about Pache is he actually draws walks. He takes a lot of pitches, works the count, right? He does a lot of the things that they said that they wanted Johan Rojas to do, bat ninth every day in center field. Pache really seems to be better against lefties than righties, which is why Rojas still plays ahead of Pache. But really, I mean, they found places for these guys to be your 11th, 12th hitter, on your team.
Well,
And they've come through.
Think about the guy that we talked about on Monday, Cody Clemens, like the man of the
Yeah.
hour, right? Like we saw him Monday night, Tuesday night, whatever it was. Yeah, Tuesday night. And then we haven't seen him again since. He was hitless, but that guy was a focal point of our conversation 3 days ago, and you almost like forget about him because, here comes Edmundo Sosa, who's been awesome this week, and here comes Christian Pache, who was a difference maker. I have a question here for you. Do you think, I certainly want to keep this. They're playing so well, so I want our conversation to kind of run in accordance to that. Do you believe that the Phillies would be better off right now in the short term giving Christian Pache more playing time and maybe reducing how much we see Johan Rojas? And I don't want to frame the conversation around his recent defensive struggles. We addressed that already. Or what can he be offensively beyond this season? Not really the conversation I'm looking to have. Just this Phillies team right now, like, I don't think they need to change anything. Like, I think they could just do it the way they're doing it. Certainly the results speak to that. But, like, do you see a world where maybe the Phillies say, like, more Pache, less Rojas, and it kind of becomes like a subtle shift?
I felt that that's the way they should have started the year, because I felt like they needed to have Rojas go down and continue to work on hitting. They didn't do that. They kept him up. It's been successful, so you can't argue with what they've done. I'm not convinced.
Globally successful from a global perspective.
Correct.
I don't know that it's his.
Well, sure, but I mean, here's the thing: you can hide your weaknesses when you're winning like this, right? So if they were not winning, if they were not 37-14, let's imagine instead, Bob, of being 37-14 at their 28-23 at this point, right? And they're behind the Braves. Are we comfortable with what's going on in center field? Are we comfortable with what's going on in right field?
I mean, the conversation would be like, what are they doing? What are they waiting for? Why are we doing this?
Correct.
They're not playing their best guys. Come on,
Correct.
Like, you got to step on the gas. That would be the conversation.
Right. So that's my point. So, like, I think that because they're going so well that they give these guys a little bit more runway than they probably would have otherwise. And so Rojas has had a little bit more time. Castellanos has had a little bit more time without having to sit and whatever the case might be. So I look at those guys and say that they're able to do that, but it's at some point that's got to end. I'm not certain that it's going to be right now. But I think that your question is a fair one, because it might behoove the Phillies to sit there and say, all right, we've seen 2 months of Johan Rojas as the regular center fielder. Why don't we give Christian Pache a month and see what that looks like?
See what it looks like. So then maybe you can make a more informed decision when you get to the end of July about how you really want to proceed. Because look, I think that there's a world where you say you have a young kid in Johan Rojas that you believe in, and you're able to sort of hide some of his deficiencies right now, and you want him to be able to grow, and you sort of have a luxury that he's playing on a team that is so good that it takes a lot of the focus and pressure off of him and his struggles. So give him time to grow, and just you're so fortunate that you can do it in this winning environment. Great. But that being said, Is there also a world where Christian Pache is better? Is there a world where he's not? Maybe they let him play he gets the bulk of starts against left-handed pitching for an extended run. And we kind of come to find out that, oh, you know what? The more you see this guy, the less you kind of come to like him.
Right.
So maybe that is part of the equation. But like, to me, it's like, yeah, the reason why I would maybe consider skewing that start distribution a little bit is because I want as much information as possible to make the best decision possible as I figure out what my roster is going to look like come August 1st. And so for that reason, it's something that I would maybe start to consider. I'm not saying you have to bury one guy, but I do think that maybe you start to take that into consideration a little bit.
Yeah, I'm going to be curious to see what this lineup looks like tonight because it's another lefty. So is it a situation where Pache gets the start in center again? Or is Pache in left and Rojas is in center? Or, what is it? So I'm going to be curious to see how that plays out because that might tell us a little bit more. But I mean, Pache has been getting regular starts against left-handed pitching since the Miami series. So I kind of think that that's going to continue. The question is it in center field or is it in left field? And I think that's where
I would imagine that you're going to see Pache and Sosa in the lineup tonight. I don't think you'll see Clemens, and I don't think that you're going to see Whit Merrifield. I know he had a hit late yesterday, but against some soft contacts, some at bats, or just like this guy's just not locked in right now. I know they have to try to keep him, they have to keep giving him at bats. They have to keep finding ways to get him on the field. But it's kind of becoming clear right now that in this moment, and maybe this will change and there will be a day in the near future where they need him. But right now they don't really need him. And so I would not expect to see Whit Merrifield tonight. So I do think you're going to see, I think you're probably going to see both Pache and Rojas, and then you're going to see, Sosa at shortstop. I think that's what you're going to see, unless they want to give Bryson Stott one of his lefty starter, why is this guy sitting nights, which is possible
against Ty Block.
Yeah, I know. I mean,
come on,
how many times have we done that this season?
No, I mean, I could get it if it's if it's a tough, like a real tough lefty. I get it in those instances, but a guy like Ty Block, who you could just take the A and turn it to an E to get what he really is, which is ugh.
Nicely done.
Right. I mean, that against a guy like that.
That was your own, right? The intern didn't give that to you?
The intern did not give me that. That was mine.
Sure that
was
mine. Proper credit if you did. Let me give you some projections here. Fangraphs says the Phillies have a 98.9% chance of making the postseason. Baseball Reference says that they have a 99.8% chance of making the postseason. Do you feel that those numbers are pretty accurate at this point?
I mean, how can it not be? So if you did
could you imagine the story that could you imagine if this team didn't make the playoffs? Like what would have to have happened and what the backlash of that would be?
They have an 11-game lead on the first team, on the last wild card team. So the Giants, so it's even more than that. So the Giants are 25 and 26. They're the first team outside of the wild card race right now in the National League. Yeah. So the Phillies have a 12-game lead on the first team not to make the play. You are not blowing a 12-game lead and being caught by like 5 teams. That ain't going to happen.
All right. Let me give you this one then. Fangraphs still is projecting the Atlanta Braves to win the division, despite the current standings and despite everything that the Phillies have done so far. They give the Braves a 52% chance to win the division, whereas they give the Phillies a 48% chance to win the division. Do you think that that's a fair number? Like if you look at where the standings are right now, would you say that you like the Phillies because they have the lead, and if all things were equal and they had the same record entering play tonight, you would tilt Atlanta? But because the Phillies have gotten this lead, you lean Phillies? Like, is it? I guess this is a roundabout way of saying which of these two teams is better. Knowing what you know, knowing how good the Braves have been in the regular season these past few years, they always win the division. The Phillies have not been this consistently awesome. Which of these two teams is better?
I think the Phillies are the better team right now, and I think that ultimately I'm going to stick with my preseason prediction that they're going to win the division. But I do not think that this race is a foregone conclusion. Nor do I think it's a 6-game lead is something you just sit on your laurels about either. I mean,
I don't think so either.
yeah, I mean,
At all.
and I know why Fangraphs is doing what it's doing because I mean, the Braves have already played a few tough teams, whereas the Phillies haven't, and so you figure once the Phillies start to play those teams consecutively, and Atlanta plays some of these weaker opponents, the gap will close, and then maybe it comes down to head, and I think you said what was it 52-48? Is that what it
Yep.
is right now? Okay,
Yep.
so it's basically a coin toss when you sit there and say, okay, if it comes down to the remaining head-to-head matchups between the Phillies and the Braves, if the Braves come out a game ahead or 2 games ahead, then they'll win the division. So I can see why they're going in that direction, but and I think that the Braves will make it closer. There's no doubt in my mind that they will because the guys that aren't hitting will start to hit, and I think they're going to trade for pitching to help their rotation before the deadline. So I think they're going to get better. But I don't see the Phillies having this massive drop off, Bob. I think it'll drop off slightly. I think that they're not going to play at a 73% win percentage pace the whole year. But I don't see it dropping off enough for Atlanta to really pass them at this point. So I think the Phillies are the better team.
As you may be aware, the Phillies through 51 games are on pace to win 117 and a half games. So if you round up, 118 games would be the best record in the history of Major League Baseball, or the most wins in the history of Major League Baseball, I'll say. I don't expect them to get there, but interestingly enough, Fangraphs also, and I want to talk a little bit about the baseball reference projections, which are somewhat different in a moment. Fangraphs projects the Phillies to win 96 and a half games in this moment. Are you comfortable going over on 96 and a half?
Yes, because I think Fangraphs always undershoots this. Like when you look at it, they very rarely pick teams to win a lot of games, and whatever their metrics are, and I don't know how their algorithms work or how many times what they use to make these projections. They always seem to be low. Like even last year, like when we were sitting there saying, "Oh yeah, we see the Phillies," and because we follow them and we're around them every day, I think we have a little bit better of a perspective of who they are and what they are than the computer models that Fangraphs is using. We both looked at last year's team and said this is a 90-win team, which is where they ended up, right? Fangraphs, I think, had them at 82 going into the season, right? And so like I felt like they undershot it a little bit, and I think that those things will undershoot. So you said they have them at 96 and a half. That probably puts them at 101, 102, somewhere in there is more realistic. And so if you asked me right now, do I think the Phillies are going to 100 games? I do. I think they're going to break 100 wins at this point. But I also don't think they're going to win 118. So I think it's probably somewhere just over 100 that we're looking at.
On the other side of things, you have Baseball Reference, who projects the Phillies to win 100 games on the nose. Mm-hmm. So a little bit more optimistic and probably a little bit more in line with what a lot of people are thinking at the moment. And they give the Phillies a 69% chance to win the division. So baseball Reference's projections are a lot more bullish on the Phillies. I think if you said to me right now, like in terms of your own confidence level, if you were going a 1 to 100 scale, like I would probably give the Phillies a 55% chance to win the division right now. Like 69 seems aggressive to me. Did not mean to do that. I promise. I wasn't like, taking the low hanging fruit there. It just happened. But I mean, I do think that that's a pretty strong number. At the same time, I don't see 48. Like, I think that it's more likely than not, based on what I've seen so far from these two teams, that the Phillies win the division. And I picked the Braves. I've recently picked the Braves, and I guess I will just because I don't know. I'm just going to stay there for right now. It seems to be working for everybody. But if I had to assign a number to it, I would say that it tilts slightly in the favor of the Phillies. How can it not? I mean, like we talked about, you have a pitching staff that has the third best ERA in baseball. You're scoring more runs than any other team in baseball right now. It's like it's really hard to find the weakness. Whereas if you watch the Braves, which I know you do, and as do I don't love some of the things I'm seeing. Now, I will admit, certainly when you look at Matt Olson, you look at the season that Ronald Acuna is having, you see that there are guys that the back of the baseball card, that at some point they're going to go off and be those guys. So I admit that there's probably some ceiling that the Braves have not tapped into yet, but I don't love that bullpen. And again, like Chris Sale has been so awesome. I just need to see more than 10 starts before I say that Chris Sale's this guy. And if he is, then that's a problem for the Phillies, because if he can do this for 30 plus starts and ride that into October, then I view the Braves a little bit differently. But I'm still kind of waiting for that regression or that injury, which is something that we've been able to come to expect in recent years with him.
Yeah, and to me, I think it's more the regression. I think that these guys maybe are. I think the Braves recognize that, oh geez, the injury to Strider, we got to keep our pitchers healthy. So I'm sure that they're probably going to try and do their best to take advantage, take care of their pitchers. But I'm not certain that a guy who's been banged up as many times as he's been banged up over the last several years is now going to put out 32 straight starts of really good pitching. I think that he's going to hit a little bit of a wall. Yeah, even a guy like Renato Lopez, who's pitched really well for them.
Well, yeah.
I mean, he was a bullpen guy for the last few years. So how much longer does that go on?
Yeah.
Because once his innings starts getting up really high, like you sit there and go, okay, I don't know how long that goes. So that's why I'm still more bullish on the Phillies. I'm not up, probably not up to Baseball References list, but I would probably put them at around 60%.
Well,
if you ask me right now.
Interesting about how Baseball Reference does this. It says Major League Baseball playoff odds are based on 1,000 simulations of the rest of the season and playoffs. The team's estimated quality is determined by their performance over their last 100 regular season games, even if it spans seasons and includes a regression to the mean factor. These results are based on standings. So it's worth noting that it spans 100 games back, even if it crosses multiple seasons, which I think is really important in this case, because if you look at it, the Phillies are largely the same team with the same players.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes into account that this is not a 51 game mirage, which is when people talk about the strength of schedule thing. The problem that I have with that, and the reason why I can't really engage with that conversation, is because you can go back now over a full 162 regular season games to late last May, and the Phillies have, I believe they're 103 and 59 over their last 162.
Yep.
So this isn't like a smoke and mirrors, small sample size, beaten up on cupcakes. That's how they did this. Like, this has been a team that has played at 100 plus win pace now for a calendar year. So how can you dismiss what you're seeing? And even if you want to kind of say, well, yeah, I don't know. They were in the World Series 2 years ago. They were in the NLCS last year. It's not like that this is some team that came out of nowhere. This isn't the 93 Phillies playing at a 117 win pace where you go, I don't know, who the hell are these guys? Like, this is a team that has some pedigree, that has some stud players who have shown now for an extended period of time that they can win baseball games. So, like, why are people trying to lean into the schedule thing to the degree that they are?
Well, here's the other thing, Bob, and I'll tell you the other thing, that the schedule, and everything you just said is spot on correct. I'll throw one more thing into it, just to say, stop worrying about the schedule. If you look at who the Phillies have played, and then look at who the Atlanta Braves have played, okay, and you take out the teams that they have not played that are the same, so go just look at their common opponents, right? The Phillies would still have a 6-game lead on the Braves, playing just the same teams that they've played. So the Phillies are 37-14 against the same teams that the Braves are 29-18 against. So the Phillies would still have the same lead. So the opponents don't matter, because they've performed better against the teams that they've played than the Braves have against the same teams.
Yeah.
It is what it is. That's just, and the schedule is balanced. Yes, the Phillies will have a tougher stretch. There's a stretch coming up later in the year where they got to play like 5 good teams in a row, and I'm sure that they're not going to win 75% of those games. Okay, but they've banked enough of enough wins here in the beginning, so that after you get through that, even if you come through that 500 in those 5 series, you sit there and go, well, we're still winning this division. We still have a very good record. We still probably have the best record in baseball, or right near the top of the baseball. Like, why complain about this? Like, it doesn't make any sense. None of it makes sense.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I don't want to be that guy that's always like, Philly doesn't get any respect. Philly doesn't get credit. Like, everyone's always picking on us. The national media doesn't like us. But it was weird. Like, the other night, I think it was after Wednesday's game, the Phillies clinch a series win over the Rangers, and it's like John Heyman out of nowhere, who's like, yeah, like another win for the red hot Phillies, but their schedule's been terrible. I'm like, it's a weird thing to tweet. Like, I've never heard this discussion around baseball teams before. Maybe it's because the Phillies haven't played at a 117 win pace in recent seasons. So people here don't, nobody's said that about this team, but I don't think I've ever looked at, maybe I'd have to go back, but I don't think I've ever looked at the Braves from a high level. Maybe like in a given week, if they go 6-1 or something, or they win 8 straight games, and I go, I haven't really beat anybody this week. Like, they should do that. But when you're talking about like entire 2 months of baseball, I've never written off a 2-month performance of games because the schedule was soft. That's a football conversation. You do that when the Cowboys are 4-1 and you're 2-3 and you're trying to figure out how you're going to get back into the division race and make yourself go to sleep and feel better at night. You talk about the schedule. Oh, who'd they beat? In baseball, you just don't do it. But I feel like I've seen it more this year than I've ever seen that type of discussion before in my life. And it's truly bizarre. To kind of switch fronts here.
Can I just say one more thing on this front, just for the sake of this conversation? So the Yankees, who have the second best record in baseball behind the Phillies, they've played more games against teams with winning records to this point, but they're 7-7 in those games.
Right.
So is anybody sitting there saying, well, the Yankees have this great record, but they're only 500 against winning teams? Like, nobody's saying that.
Yeah.
Because it's the Yankees.
Right.
You expect the Yankees to be that good. Like, the whole thing is BS to me. I don't know why baseball is not a sport where you could talk about the schedule. Yeah. Stop with the football mentality. The schedule is the same, almost the same for everybody. Obviously, some divisions are better than others, but the schedule is almost the same for everybody.
When did you think that JT Realmuto stopped being the best catcher in baseball? When did that happen?
It probably so. If I take you back, if you remember, the first half of 22, he was not good. He was not good at all in the first half of 22. But he became the Phillies MVP after Bryce Harper got hurt.
Right? Almost like that day. Like,
yes.
If you go and look, here you go. Here's an exercise for the people out there. Go to Baseball Reference. Go to the 2022 JT Realmuto game log page. And go to, I want to say it was in June. It might have been May. I don't know.
It was June. You're right.
They were in San Diego. Snell breaks Harper's hand or wrist or whatever it is. And like the day that happens, go to the next day and take JT Realmuto's endpoint the rest of the season and look at that stat line. Phenomenal.
Yeah, he was really, really good. So, maybe we started to see signs of it in 22. But he had such a good second half of the year that it didn't happen. I would say last year, though, it was probably when he got passed. There were a couple catchers who had better years than him. You started to see a couple of things that weren't as good defensively. He wasn't, he still has the great pop times, throwing runners out, but it's a few more wild pitches and pass balls getting by him. I think it was as much of an adjustment for him and for all catchers really as it was pitchers with the pitch clock, right? And kind of getting used to that. So maybe that was part of it. But man, he's kind of had a rebound here, and I'm not certain that he's the best catcher in baseball now. He get kind of tough with that guy Adley Rutschman down the road in Baltimore.
Yeah.
But man, he's right back up near the production level that he was at offensively prior to last season. So I give him a heck of a lot of credit. And I think that a difficult question, Bob, is can you take him out of the 2-hole?
The way he's had too many guys that can hit in the 2-hole right now. Yeah. That's their latest problem. When Trey Turner comes back, who's hitting 2? Is it Realmuto? Is it Turner? Look, the reason why I framed the conversation and entered the conversation the way I did was because it's almost like I think maybe this demise of his has been a little bit exaggerated. Now, we've talked a little bit about the Phillies' struggles with pass balls and wild pitches this season. They are among the worst teams in baseball in that regard. I'm certainly not pinning all of that on JT Realmuto, but he gets off to kind of a little bit of an up and down start. I would say a start where he was sort of under the radar this season. But right now, he's in the midst of a career best 13-game hitting streak. He's homered in consecutive games. He's hitting 16 of his last 17 games. And if you look at that stretch, in his last 17 games, he's 25 for 71. He's hitting 352. And if you go back to April 28th, he was hitting 237. You wake up this morning, he's hitting 285. In that same stretch, he's jumped his OPS from 685 to 792. He's lifted it up by over 100 percentage points here. All of a sudden, this looks pretty good. You start to look at some of the best offensive outputs for catchers across the sport, and JT Realmuto is mostly like anywhere between top 4 to top 7. Is he elite? Is he in a class of his own? No. But like, they are getting a hell of a lot of production out of this guy right now. And I would point out that over the past few years, I mean, they have worked this guy. I mean, they have, and I don't mean this like it's their fault or that they're abusive in how they deploy him, but I mean, they beat the shit out of this guy, right? Like the amount of innings that he catches and what they expect from him physically. 7:00 game. Next day, he's in the lineup at 1 p.m. Like, there's a lot of that. I feel like the Phillies step on the gas a little bit with JT more than on some other teams do with other catchers. Obviously, the disparity, and this isn't a knock on Garrett Stubbs, but the disparity between what they have starting and what they have as a backup, there's a pretty good gap there, too. So the fall off for other teams, they might have 2 more, like, mediocre guys, so you don't feel it. It's not as pronounced. Like, he's so important to what they're doing offensively that it's hard to sit him.
Yeah, I agree. And we talked to JT after the game on Wednesday, and asked him, what has changed for him. And one of the things I thought was interesting, and I think it has a lot to do with really where he's batting, but he said that it's simplified. Like, basically just concentrate on the strike zone, make sure you make contact on pitches in the strike zone, and not try and do too much. He says, if I just get on base, the guys that I have hitting behind me are likely going to drive me in. So he's taken a simpler approach, maybe batting 5th or 6th in the lineup or wherever you have him that's not second. He's trying to be a run producer, and he's not that, and maybe, or not enough of that.
Yeah.
But putting him in a spot where it's just like, hey, just get on base for us and we'll get you home. He's far more productive.
Well, I'll humor you for a second with the lineup conversation. You said, I don't know if you can take him out of the 2-hole. Okay. So what are you doing?
I think you got to try when he comes back leading off Turner. And I know that people are going to go nuts because I sat here and told you,
because I knew this was going to be a response, which will in a moment set up a segue to my next conversation.
Which I know is kind of crazy. Anthony, you're being hypocritical because you've sat here defending the choice to lead off Kyle Schwarber. And my argument has always been Schwarber is the best option they have right now. But that doesn't necessarily mean he's always going to be the best option, right? And up to this point, and I would stick with Schwarber, I wouldn't change it now with Turner out of the lineup. Schwarber is the leadoff guy in my mind. But maybe you think about going with Turner there in the leadoff spot and go Turner, Realmuto, Harper, Bohm, and then you bat Schwarber in the 5 spot. Maybe. And I'm not saying, and look, the beauty of it is that you're going to have an opportunity to try some things if you are maintaining this lead in the division, right? Like if you keep that 6-7 game lead in the division, you're going to have some opportunity to try some things out and see if it works. And I think that it might be worth considering as the season goes on. Not saying it's a definite, but it's something to consider.
Yeah, so I do want to talk a little bit about Kyle Schwarber. His last 15 games, I'll just give this to you here. He's 13 for 52. So he's hitting 250. It's not bad. He's walking a ton, 15 walks in 15 games.
Leads the league.
Yeah. And it's weird, though. Like, there's just so many more singles to his game this year. Like,
I talked to him about this.
So I want you to give this insight. I didn't know you talked to him about this, actually. So this is a cool kind of coincidence that we're going to have this conversation, but a lot more singles. And even there was an at bat yesterday early in the game where I think it was his second at bat of the game. It was, I believe, the 3rd inning. Phillies are down 1-0. They have the bases loaded, and he's up there and he singles in his first at bat. and he runs a full count. He's getting worked away, and he's spitting on these pitches. He gets the count full, and you're like, he might walk in a run here, but he ends up grounding out. He hits the ball hard to the right side. He almost pulls it between the first baseman, second baseman, and you're thinking like, oh, off the bat, this it ends up being a ground out inning over. But the at bat to me was like so much different than like what we've seen with him recently, like in recent years. He just seems like a different offensive player. And is that by design? Because look, I mean, 1 home run over 15 games for Kyle Schwarber, like that's not good, right? But like over those 15 games, his OPS is still in like the mid 700s. It's just a totally different look that we're getting out of him right now.
I asked, and this is why I wanted to talk to him. I wanted to ask him because I felt like we're seeing more singles and doubles from him and not seeing as many home runs. And I was trying to figure out why. And he said, part of it is I'm getting pitched down a lot more than I have in recent years. He said there was, in past years, the goal has always been to try and get strikeouts up in the zone. He said, and pitchers were getting them, fastballs up. He said, but if you miss, there's more damage on a fastball up. Right. And so a lot of his home runs have come on pitches that missed up in the zone. So pitchers are attacking him down. And so now he's had to kind of adjust to, living on with a lot of pitches in the lower part of the zone, lower third of the zone, or even slightly out of the zone. And how does that change anything? He says, look, my swing is my swing. I'm not going to change my swing. He said, but it's a lot different swinging the way I swing on a ball that's down as opposed to a ball that's up. And so that's, he says it's part of the cat and mouse game that you play with a pitcher. And he says, so right now this is what it is. And this is how how I'm combating it. He said, but just when you think you got it figured out, he says, it's going to change again. And he says, and then it's going to be a matter of adjusting to that. Right. So it was kind of really a really cool conversation that I had with him. And I haven't had a chance to actually write this story yet. I was going to do it the other day, and then he went over. So it's like, well, it really doesn't make sense to do it after over.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of holding it, but I'm going to get it out there. But yeah, I mean, so like, it was really kind of, it's funny that you brought it up because it was, it's something that he's obviously seeing the way things are going and the way he's being pitched. And he's just trying to take advantage as best he can of the pitches that he's seeing. And so it might, equate to fewer home runs, but he's going to get on base more than he did. He's getting more, get more, better batting average, higher on base percentage, but maybe lower slugging and fewer home runs.
Well, I say this with the full knowledge that we've yet to experience June Schwarber, as everybody likes to point to. And you figure that's going to come, and he's going to go through a 6-game stretch where he hits 5 home runs, and all of these projections are going to look different. But I will say, he right now is projected to hit 29 home runs this season, which is certainly far short of what you'd expect. You kind of have come to pencil him in for 40 home runs. So that part of it's interesting, but it doesn't mean that he has not been productive. He's still on pace for 95 runs batted in out of the leadoff spot. He's on pace to walk 118 times. And right now, he would, at 223, have his best batting average of any of the 3 seasons that he spent in Philadelphia. I mean, 223 is nothing to write home about, but a season after hitting 197, we've had this conversation before. Like, if he could just get that batting average up, like another 20 or 30 points, we'd all feel a lot better about it. Well, he's doing that right now. It's just the home runs seem to be the one missing piece of his game.
Yeah, for sure. And, if you look at it, I mean, his career batting average is 226. So he's right around his career batting average. His on-base percentage right now is 350, which is above his career on-base percentage by 10 points. Like that's something, right? I mean, and it's not just the walks. He's getting more hits, and so that helps. Where the drop off is in the slug, which is what you point out. His slug is down to 386. He's a career 486.
But this is what's so crazy about it. Like, we're talking about maybe after all this time, finally moving him out of the leadoff spot and putting him now in the middle of the order, when his offensive profile is actually starting to speed aside, look more like a leadoff hitter. It's kind of funny, right? Like,
well, it's more of a traditional. Yeah. More of a traditional leadoff hitter, right? Yeah. But he is cutting down on the strikeouts a little bit.
He's still on pace to strike out over 200 times. So it's
a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
which is what he's really trying to do.
I wouldn't start calling him Kyle Contact quite yet, but yeah.
No,
Uh,
you're right.
all right, so let's just look ahead here a little bit, and then we can maybe kind of wrap it up. I mean,
Yeah.
look, you got 3 games against the Rockies this weekend. I'm not even going to try to make a guess as to what's going to happen. The Phillies don't see the Rockies' best arms, quite frankly. They did have trouble with Quantrill earlier this season in Philadelphia. They'll see him on Sunday, I believe. The 2 guys that they'll see to start the series, not particularly impressive. Statistics certainly don't blow you away. Then they go out to San Francisco. And as we've noted previously, that place has been just a real house of horrors for them. You kind of expect this team at some point to struggle. You expect this team at some point to hit that lull. Is it coming on this trip?
It could happen in San Francisco because that's a stadium that they never perform well in. It's not a stadium that's conducive for the long ball, right? So for a team in the last couple of years that has relied heavily on the long ball, you figure that you go to that stadium where it's got a massive outfield, and maybe it's not your friend, right? Maybe it's not that maybe that's a thing. And the Giants are playing better. I know you swept them when they came here. So the Giants are gonna have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, right? They don't want to get embarrassed at home by a team that already swept them. So I think that there's a chance that happens, but, and there's a caveat, it's not the same Phillies team. They're not. Here's one thing we didn't bring up on the show, Bob, and I was thinking about writing this as a story too, and maybe it'll be good for while they're on the road trip. But think of it this way: one of the reasons that everybody is enjoying watching this Phillies team, not just because they're winning, but because they're winning in a style of baseball that is kind of a throwback. You look at their pitchers, like, other than Wheeler, none of the starters throw gas. So they're pitching all these 7 innings. It's kind of like a throwback mentality where you value pitchers who can go long, a lot of innings, and they're pitching. They're not throwing. They're pitching. Yeah, you still got the power arms in the bullpen. Okay, fine. And they still slug. I mean, I'm not trying to say they don't, but there's a lot of guys that are driving in runs with hits and stolen bases and activating runner hit and run kind of thing. Like, I mean, they're doing all the things, other than they're not, I don't want to call it small ball because it's not, they're not bunting, right? But they're doing the things that Major League Baseball wanted teams to do with the new rules.
Right.
Maybe more than any other team. And I think that makes them fun and interesting and exciting to watch. So therefore, maybe it's not going to be the same problems you run into in San Francisco. I think that if there's a chance of it happening in one of the 2 cities, it's more likely to happen against the Giants than it is against the Rockies. But look, Bob, I'm looking at this trip and I'm going 5-1. I would never have done this before.
Yeah.
Like, I would never.
I think they're going to struggle their way to a 5-1 trip in different time zones.
I would never do this before.
No, I mean, look, man, I will say, and just to kind of echo your point, especially on the pitching front, I saw a tweet from Baseball Reference today, actually. Philly starting pitchers have gone 7+ innings 18 times already this season. That's 10 more, that's more than 10 teams had in all of 2023. Think about that. I mean, like, the amount of length that they're consistently getting out of this rotation has been crazy. Ironically, Taijuan Walker is the guy that's supposed to be the innings eater, and he's the one that hasn't done it yet. So right. It's like, go figure, right? But they're getting it. They've gotten some starts that have lasted 7 innings from even Chris Sanchez, which you certainly would not expect. Nola's always been a big innings eater, and you certainly know that you're going to get that from Zach Wheeler. But that boost that you've gotten from Suarez and Sanchez in terms of eating innings has been massive for this team. And I wonder what the effect of that will be later on. You talk about the fatigue and wearing out your bullpen and just beating the hell out of guys. There is a world, I think, where this adds up over time, because it's not high stress stuff for the Phillies either. Like, it's not like, they're getting through 7 innings and the Phillies are riding them to 124 pitches. They've been efficient enough to get that deep into games. So I don't think you have to worry about the negative repercussion on the front end of this. Like, I feel like the Phillies have a chance to just be super fresh as they get into the back half of this year. And into October as well. I mean, it's It truly has been crazy. And every time they win a game, there's this stat and there's some player reference that we haven't seen this since 1908. And no other team has done this since 1906. And the 2001 Mariners, like everything about this team has been historical. It's just truly, truly remarkable to consume. And hopefully they keep it going here. It'll be, what's going to happen though, right? I don't think there's another shoe to drop. But when they do lose back-to-back games, this city's not going to take it well. You know that, right?
No, they're not. You're gonna get all the guys. They're gonna crawl out from under their rock and be like, "See, I told you, peaking too early, or they haven't played anybody."
I think what's happening, the best way I can describe it is now that everyone's so juiced up over this team. We all understand that baseball is not football. We know that. We've talked about that on the show. You can't consume baseball games like they're football games. But when there's so much anticipation every night for that first pitch, and everyone is so excited, it's hard to not get upset or get frustrated or get angry when things don't work out, right? Like if the Phillies go out to Colorado this weekend and they lose 2 out of 3, does that really say anything about the 2024 Phillies? Does it impact their reality moving forward? No. But like if they blow a game in the 9th inning tonight and you're sitting there and it's 11-15 and you're like, oh, come on, man. Like you're going to still have that, like, people are, I think, so in on it that it's going to be hard to just say, well, that's baseball. Better luck tomorrow. You're going to feel that,
Yeah, for
You're
sure.
going to feel it. And that's a good thing. But we just have to, I think that's what I would caution. Because I get like that too, right? Like when I process something or somebody doesn't do something, I'll shoot you a text message, usually a smart ass text message.
Love it.
I mean, I'm the king of that. And then 10 minutes later, you're like, all right, But you still get that text.
My favorite is when you send a text for a guy who's like been going good and then they do something bad and you're like, oh man, what this guy?
Yeah.
Like he's been going great for 15 games. All of a sudden,
what I put out there like publicly though is like very like measured and thoughtful.
Yes, you're good.
But as I'm watching these games, I'm like, this motherfucker.
It's so good.
And I know a lot. I know I am not alone in that.
It's so good. It's so good.
All right. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap that up. So why don't we do one last thing?
So one last thing, Bob. We've talked a lot here in Philadelphia about the great start by Ranger Suarez and how historic it is and everything else. What is your take on Shota Imanaga with the Cubs? Because he's off to an even better start. Maybe not with the wins, but his ERA is better. His WHIP is better. Like he's
got a .84 ERA right now.
It's unbelievable what he's doing for the Cubs. And it was a great story.
I read it. I just read it before we started recording this.
And where a player from the Team USA, when they faced him in the championship game of the World Baseball Classic, one of the star players, it doesn't say who, although the way it was written by Jesse Rogers, he lists Mookie Betts, Mike Trout, Paul Goldschmidt in the same sentence, which tells you it's probably one of them because that's an old journalist trick. Says that it was quoted as saying, that guy is not very good, but he is unhittable.
Yeah.
And so what do you make of Imanaga? Is this real, or are guys going to just figure this guy out after a while and it'll be just kind of like you remember that one time when he started off as good as he did?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's going to maintain this, but as it was noted in that story, he's made 9 starts. They've been against 9 different opponents. His next start will be against a 10th different opponent. And what's really interesting about it is they said that when he faces a team for a second time, like he has more in his pitch arsenal that he can tap into. Like he's approaching teams with basically 2 pitches right now. So there's a split and a fastball, and they're like, he's got some stuff that has horizontal break to it that's coming, and he'll tap into that more when he sees teams to get a different look. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see how he evolves and how he attacks opponents when they come in and they're a little bit more prepared. But the look right now is so unique. They talk about it. He throws 92 miles an hour. It's not like his stuff is overwhelming, but there's the fastball, his 4-seam fastball has some rise to it. And then, the other pitch has a little bit of like a late run downward to it. And teams like just in that vertical approach to his pitches have not been able to master it yet. I mean, to some degree, it's like, it's not Ranger Suarez, but we talk about this, like the renaissance of pitching and mix and not just relying on triple digit velocity it's such an interesting contrast because you have Paul Skeens come up who's breaking radar guns, and you got Miller out in Oakland who's blowing guys away late in games at 102. So you still see how effective that is. But then you have these guys that are living 92, 93 coming from the left side, like Suarez is. And it's been incredible to watch.
Yeah, it's fun. I'm not convinced that it lasts. I think this is a little bit of a early season unfamiliarity. He hasn't pitched in Major League Baseball. You need to see how he pitches to major league hitters versus looking at his video from when he was in Japan, and kind of get a sense of it. Then I think that I'm not saying he's going to stink, but I think that he's going to, regress back to that mean, and you're going to see a good pitcher, but not a great pitcher. But it's kind of interesting, and I actually kind of hope that the Phillies get a chance to see him when they play the Cubs in a couple weeks.
Yeah, it'll be a good test. You want to start getting looks at all those guys you're going to see in the postseason, right?
Well, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. You want to know. I mean, there's a good. I think the Cubs are a really good possibility for the Phillies in the postseason as a first round opponent. Yeah. I think it's real. I mean, I think that's a real possibility. So, for sure.
I agree with that. All right. Well, listen, for Anthony Sanfilippo, I'm Bob Wankel. You can follow Anthony on X at @SanPhilly. You can follow me at Bob_Wankel. Check out the Red October Philly newsletter at redoctoberphilly.com. That'll come out this weekend. I'm actually pushing that the Friday one into the weekend here. So maybe if you're down at the shore on the beach or something like that, you can check it out while you're there. And we'll be back on Monday. Yeah, Monday, I guess. Memorial Day? We doing a Memorial Day show, or are we going to wait till Tuesday? We'll figure it out.
I ain't going anywhere.
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere. So Monday it is. You can listen to us on the way back up from the shore. It'll be great. And we'll talk to you then.